Lord, thank you for this day. Pray to bless our time together, Lord, as we face what can only be described as pretty uncertain times. And just pray, Lord, that you will always help us remember that we are people not to be people not to have a spirit of fear, but of power through the faith that we have in you as our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And we just pray you always help us to keep that in the forefront of our mind. So bless our time together today. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, today I'm going to title this The Age of Uncertainty, and I was really kind of uncertain about whether I wanted to title it The Age of Uncertainty, but I'm certain it has some meaning, even though I'm also certain that some people will criticize it because, well, we're Christians and we know exactly what's going to happen. And that is true. We do know what's going to happen. We talk all the time about Bible prophecy, but there's some details yet that need to be worked out and exactly how it fits. And I'll talk a little bit about that today. So this is some of the channels that we're on. We are now streaming live, I believe, on 4 platforms: YouTube, Facebook, Rumble, and then our Fellowship Bible Chapel app. And we're still working on that. And we have a little bit of an issue here is we have pretty high-speed internet, but they don't give us the bandwidth to do. They give us bandwidth that we can do multiple streams, but it's also dependent on the internet staying up. So it's all very complicated. And so far, so good. But and then if I do a midweek update, and I did not do one this week because I was pretty busy with some other things, and I just didn't have the time to sit down and put it together. I barely had the time to sit down and put this one together. But if I do that, I stream to YouTube. And so if you ever see that if you subscribe to our channel, you should get notifications. I try to post it on Facebook. Sometimes I put up a special page, but then it kind of messes up some other things that I want to use later, and I have to remember to switch them back, and it's a little more complicated than I would like it to be. But so I will be doing, I'm sure I'll be doing an update this week at sometime during the week. So just watch my Facebook page. Sometimes I put it on Twitter or Getter that I'm doing that. So it's, and those will always be streamed, at least for right now, onto YouTube. And because they're streamed onto YouTube, that means that they're not going to be dealing with a few issues, because YouTube is still censoring people all the time. Oh, okay. So I was just told we now have 50,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel. So thank you all for doing that. And we appreciate you signing up. So we talk about the convergence of events and all these different things that when they happen, some of these were historic events, but then they have a prophetic element in terms of a pattern. For example, if you look over here to the second panel from the left and then down one, that's a representation of what the ancient city of Jericho looked like. And you can go there today if you go there, although many evangelicals don't believe that that's Jericho. I remember when we were there in 1995, we kind of drove past the site. We went to the cafe that's right next door to get something, actually the most wonderful grapefruit juice I've ever had in my life. But we drove past the tell of Jericho, and they sort of said, well, some people think that that's where stuff happened at Jericho. And I thought back to I took a class on biblical archaeology in college, some classes, and one of the things my professor told me was they were going to change the narrative about Jericho because it was too difficult for the people who liked the Palestinian Authority to deal with the fact that that Jericho was an actual historical site. And that's what happened. Kathleen Kenyon was the one who did the first major excavations there. The tell that you see today is only half of what was there back at the time of Joshua, because they always built cities around a water source. The water source, they had to walk down a big hill, so they tore down part of the tell, so it was easier for them to get to the water. But I have no doubt in my mind that place that you can go to today is the actual site of Jericho, and there's plenty of evidence for that. And I would highly recommend that you look at a couple of things. One is Joel Kramer's Expedition Bible YouTube channel. I don't know if if you look for Joel Kramer and Jericho on YouTube, you will find some of his talks at Jericho. And I'm not sure if it's in his book, but I would highly recommend that you get his book, Where God Came Down. It's only available in hardback. You can get it on Amazon. And it's a great resource. It will really change your idea about archaeology and that sort of thing. And it will really help you. So in Jericho itself, the book of Joshua also seems to be a pattern that plays out, at least part of it, in Revelation. The 777s that we see in Revelation, you see the 777s in the book of Joshua, and there's a very close parallel. So you can learn some of the things about what's going to go happen in Revelation, or how Revelation is describing it, by looking at the patterns that you see in the book of Joshua. So we live at this time of things happening very quickly. I use this every week. I've used this for probably 10 years, a world disrupted, and can we fix this? And it seems that we are entering a time. This week just came out, the new edition, the centennial issue of Foreign Affairs. Now, I understand Foreign Affairs is published by the Council on Foreign Relations, and they're largely a globalist organization. And when I say largely, I mean largely. That does not mean that all of them there are these raving globalists and that sort of thing. They do have a broad spectrum of different views that contribute to the Council on Foreign Relations, but they're largely globalists. But it's just interesting that, at this particular time, with everything that's going on, they come out with this thing, and you see the guy there walking in the dark with a light, the age of uncertainty. And it is the age of uncertainty, because what we're seeing is that everything is changing. And again, this is I sort of look at Bible prophecy as this multi-layered, three-dimensional thing where all these different parts in the orchestra fit together and they make this beautiful symphony, but they all have to work together or there's a lot of discord. So it's very easy. And one of the things I've tried to contribute to the conversation in Bible prophecy is to try to help us all be more consistent when we talk about things. So we all read The Late Great Planet Earth. It was, at the time, the biggest selling Christian book of all time. And I would still say you go read it, but understand it was written over 50 years ago now. I think it was published in 1969 or 70. And the world has changed a bit in the last 50 years. The world has changed a lot in the last 3 years. So, and I can say, I'm pretty sure, and this is not a slam on anybody, if you go back to 2019 and you look at my updates and other people's updates, other people's teachings at conferences and that sort of thing, from like 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, I'm pretty sure that you're not going to find anybody that called 2020 to 22 accurately, because it just changed dramatically. Nobody in 2019 was saying, just wait till next year. Now we said, boy, could we just go back to last year, because it was a lot better than it is right now. And my fear is that with the acceleration and convergence of everything, this year is going to be, it certainly has the potential to be unlike anything we've seen. I would recommend that you occasionally go to, you can go to the Economic Collapse blog by Michael Snyder. And by the way, by recommending his blog, I want to make a disclaimer here. The fact that I might be seen with a certain person or that I might recommend information that you can gather from a certain person's blog does not mean that I agree with everything that the person says or believes. In fact, they may not like me recommending them. I don't know, because I don't agree with them on everything. But just understand, be a little bit more, judge me for what I say and not for who I recommend. And always use discernment whenever you look at anything. So I read a broad variety of things. I read the Washington Post. I read the New York Slimes. I read the UK Times, Financial Times, Wall Street Journal. I mean, I read a wide variety of mainstream sources and look at mainstream sources because in many cases, that's how you learn what the enemy is doing. It doesn't mean if I quote the New York Times, doesn't mean I've adopted what the New York Times believes. But I think it's an important media outlet, still is, even though they're governed and run by a bunch of lunatics, it appears more and more. But just understand, be a little nuanced that just because I talk about something does not mean that I agree with them on everything. But we do live at this time where the world, I mean, these are some of the leading thinkers, using the scare quotes, thinkers in the world, and they're talking about this is the age of uncertainty. Now, from what I gather from that is that they don't know what's going to happen. And I'm seeing that quite a bit, and I think some people are very concerned about what's going to happen. Now, on the other side of the ledger, I think you have people trying to make things happen. And it appears that the collapse has been pretty, sometimes engineered. And maybe it went faster than they thought, and it's got out ahead of them. That's also possible. But we know, I always quote this verse in Daniel 9, or Daniel 12, because it talks about, the book is sealed up until the time of the end. And when I say that, then everybody says, well, the time of the end, and it's, okay, we're going to argue about what the time of the end is. Certainly we're at the time of the end. And when you look through Daniel's prophecies in Daniel 7, 8, 9, 11, 12, and there are references in there, not in every chapter or in every vision, but there are some that references this is for the time of the end. So I don't think the time of the end was 2,000 years ago because we're still here. That's sort of how I figured that one out. So, but it does say at the time of the end that people will go back and forth, to and fro, and I think that means back and forth through the book. And so we'll be piecing together all of these prophecies, and what didn't seem to make sense 10, 15, 20, 30, 50 years ago will start to make more sense as we get closer. Sort of like my example of the eye chart. As you get closer to that eye chart, everything gets clearer. So that's the sort of the framework that I work from. And so I live in the United States, so I'm more American-centric than other people that might live overseas and Australia and other places because they see things differently. I hear from people in South Africa. I mean, Africa is almost like, the whole of Africa is almost like the unknown continent in many respects. We do sponsor a pastoral school, Steve Mitchell Pastoral School in Malawi. We help a mission there here at FBC from contributions we receive at FBC. But Africa, by and large, it's almost like it doesn't exist on the map. And I have a lot of friends in South Africa, and they send me things and just the corruption and problems that they have there. But parts of South Africa are very wonderful, pastoral, peaceful, but there are many places that are really in a lot of turmoil. And it's very similar here. So this morning in the New York Times, there was, and I don't have a slide for it, there was an editorial. And in this editorial, it said that we need to fight censorship. That's what the title, I forget the exact title of the editorial. We need to fight censorship. And I'm thinking, like, on what planet? This is what the New York Times wants to do. So I understand that there are a lot of people there was a lawsuit filed by the Attorney General of Missouri against a lot of the big tech companies, and they've been able to get discovery. And what they're finding is that there was pretty close cooperation between the White House and big tech to censor certain stories. Now, what you're going to hear is they're going to, like they do in this editorial, is the White House didn't really want to censor anything. Some of that stuff really was misinformation. You know, like they said, so-and-so did this, and so-and-so doesn't even exist. Okay, but that's not at the heart of what this is all about, this concern about misinformation. So they come in and they have this narrative about the election, they have the narrative about Charlie Vector and all these different things. And if you notice that it's a kind of an ever-shifting thing, and part of the reason they do this is because they want to paint everybody that opposes them as a crazy extremist. And the president comes out and makes a speech where he does this, and then he walks it back, in large part. But the effect is done. The other thing that I've noticed is I'll look at Twitter and I'll see somebody put up a post about the Queen. And all of a sudden, the vitriol and hatred, I mean, everybody's just sort of venting about everything. And then if somebody says, well, I love the Queen, oh, well, you're just a crazy idiot because you don't believe like I do. And the division in society is just unbelievable. So one of the ways of looking at the seven churches in Revelation is that they represent church ages. Now, I'm not hard and fast on that, but you can kind of make the case for that. And so if the last church mentioned, the seventh church in the book of Revelation, is the church of Laodicea. And if you look at the way that word is constructed, you can say that it means the church of people's opinions, the church of everyone's opinion. And isn't that true that over the last 20, 30 years with the emergent church and postmodernism and everything, everybody was saying, well, it's true for me. Well, how about what's true as opposed to what's true for you? So it became truth became a very elastic thing. Whatever you believed was true. And that happened in the church over the last 30 years. How did that go in society, by the way? Do we have that in society now? So we have these narratives that build up. And so, the narrative is with the election in 2020, you all tried to change the election results. And violent and all that type of thing. And men sit today in solitary confinement, largely, awaiting trial, almost getting close to 2 years after that incident. It's not American. It's not American. So the election thing, and so Peter Doocy asked Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, how many are you missing Jen Zuckerberg now? I mean, really, she was hard to take, but this new person. So here's Peter Doocy asking her some questions about her tweets from 2016.
The new attention on the MAGA Republicans. You tweeted in 2016 Trump stole an election. I
was waiting, Peter, when you were going to ask me that question.
Well, okay, here we go. You tweeted Trump stole an election. You tweeted Brian Kemp stole an election. If denying election results is extreme now, why wasn't it then?
let's be really clear. That comparison that you made is just ridiculous. I have been. Well, you're asking me a question. Yes. Let me answer it.
And you said it was ridiculous.
I was talking specifically at that time of what was happening with voting rights and what was in danger of voting rights. That's what I was speaking to at the time.
But she said, like, Brian Kemp stole the election in Georgia. I don't know, but she didn't say anything about voting rights. So you see this truth thing has this kind of elastic nature to it. George Friedman, writing at Geopolitical Futures this week, he has a post up about America's institutional crisis. I won't go into all the details. I think you might be able to get that free at geopoliticalfutures.com. But he wrote a book. I think I borrowed the title of the book for one of my updates, The Storm Before the Calm. Now, he has a different view of what the calm is. He thinks this will eventually work itself out. But when he wrote that, understand that he was looking at the near term, and he said in the 2020s, America will go through a major crisis. He says in this article, following up that book, he says, we're there. And we've gone through these before, and there's a cycle to these things. Just like, by the way, there's a cycle to the earth, moon, relationship, sun, and climate. The sun goes through cycles. And we may be entering or the big effects of like a grand solar minimum, which will change the world. I saw reports this week of the earliest snow and frost in places like Belarus and Siberia. Yet everybody's talking about global warming, but now it becomes climate change. Like Rachel Maddow said, I think climate change means extreme weather of all kinds. That sort of gets her off the hook on everything that she talks about. But we do live at a time of crisis. The schools, government, it's very divided out there. I don't know what the elections are going to be like in the fall. I would hope that they'll be okay, but I don't know. So so we have this issue with climate change. This is a picture from around Hemet, California this week. Also I had some friends in Hemet. Pastor Tom Hughes, I was texting with him, and he said, hey, pray for me. I had to evacuate my house twice over the past 24 hours. And two people who were fleeing the fire less than a quarter mile from where I live were burned. They got caught in the fire and burned and killed. So this is happening all over. And it's not unusual for California to have fires, but California also had this, everybody, you got to shut down your thermostats, turn your thermostats down, don't charge your car. And part of the reason was because there's this kind of convergence of what happens is that domestic power usage goes up in the afternoon usually because everybody gets home from work, they turn on the coffee maker, the microwave, the TV, turn down the air conditioner, plug in the electric car if they can afford one. And what happens is that the demand goes way up. Now, what the utility companies have done is they've said, well, government working with the utilities and want to go to renewables, wind and solar. But what happens to wind and solar in the late afternoon to early evening? Well, solar doesn't work real well when it's dark. Now, it may have batteries stored up and that type of thing, but it's not putting out the output. And so the grid can't keep up. And so you need something always on power. And that's the problem. Germany's gone to over 40% renewables, but it doesn't work all the time, particularly in a northern climate like Germany where it's cloudy a lot and maybe the wind doesn't blow. And we can see these problems happening because they don't have something that's there to provide the service that it's called a utility, that the utility is supposed to provide all the time. Now, a lot of this comes about because of ESG. I've talked a lot about this, environmental, social, and governance. And what's happening, this has been pushed by countries like Saudi Arabia and Russia, which are very big energy producers. And the West has been not thought it through. They've gone along with this ESG thing and the scores, essentially the energy scores, social credit scores that are given to companies. So they cut back on fracking, on drilling, providing energy that come back on pipelines. And there's an impact to that. It impacts the availability of resources. Then they put sanctions on Russia. Russia says, okay, you don't like us, then we won't sell gas to you. Sort of like Turkey used to be, the Arab countries in the Middle East, and Iran would say, well, Turkey, you have to buy oil from us. And Turkey would say, but we have water. So you drink your oil, we'll drink our water. And water's probably a bigger thing than anything. I might say something about this if I remember. And then the problem with this World Economic Forum, this is their strategic intelligence page, is they have this leadership group. So what you're seeing these pockets, these sort of disconnected countries doing things to further this agenda that the World Economic Forum has. And by the way, the World Economic Forum puts up stuff all the time anymore that they say, well, that's not what we meant. Like, you'll own nothing and be happy. That was just us thinking about it. It's not what they were thinking, though, because they actually put out a video, you can find it on Twitter still, that says the 8 things that we see coming are for the 2030, I think is what they were pushing for. And the first one is, you'll own nothing and be happy. That was something they put out. Now they're saying, well, we didn't really mean that. Why did you take us serious? Because, well, we take you seriously. We think that when you say something, you mean it. When you have a conference, you mean it. And so they have this leadership thing, and that's a big thing for them. They have this leadership thing, and then when you sort of peel back the layers of the onion, you find that Trudeau and a bunch of people in Canada all went to the World Economic Forum Leadership School. Emmanuel Macron, who recently announced that the era of abundance is over, sort of what I think is his Marie Antoinette moment, let them eat cake moment. He went to it. A lot of the leaders of Europe and America went there. The prime minister and some of the other people in the Netherlands went there. So the Netherlands, they put out this rule that you need to, and I don't have the map. I'll try to put it in my midweek. But they put out a map, and it was published. It actually was published, I found it was published by New Zealand. And you're going to think, now, wait a minute. Why does New Zealand care about the map that Netherlands put out? Well, understand that the leader of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, is a graduate of the World Economic Forum Leadership School, like everybody else, like the Prime Minister of the Netherlands. So what they're trying to do a couple things. They want to get rid of nitrates, which are used, the biggest usage is fertilizer. They want to get rid of of meat, like dairy farms. I posted on my Facebook page this week that I support plant-based meats. I only eat vegetarian cows. Which my vegan friends, they get upset with me when I say stuff like that. And if you want to live that way, that's fine, okay? So anyway, I really don't mind that you do that, because especially now, it's more steak for me, right? But, so we all make our choices, and we're all free to make our choices so far. I think I showed you the quote 3 weeks ago of Yuval Harari, who said that the greatest crime of humanity has been raising animals for food. He's vegan, of course. It's kind of interesting. So the leadership, so New Zealand puts out this map that the Netherlands made up about where they want to get the land. And the land they wanted to get was all these farmers' lands and the dairy farms. So that's who they targeted. And then they had a $25 billion fund set up to buy the land, to buy out the farmers. Well, in an era where there's food shortages all over the world and more coming, it seems kind of crazy, unless you're just a zealot, that you would be trying to cut back on food production, unless you have some bigger agenda or you're so blindly committed to it that you can't see the forest right in front of you. So the Netherlands does this, Canada does this, and I think they use these smaller countries, New Zealand, Canada, Netherlands, others, as test cases. This is where we're going to start to implement our agenda. Now, they didn't go do very well in the Netherlands. I believe that the guy who was pushing it, it might have been the agricultural secretary, and the Netherlands is somewhere between the second and fifth biggest food exporter in the world. And the farmers complained, and this guy finally had to resign this week. Another area, if you look at the leadership thing, is they always talk about LGBTI inclusion. This is a big part of their plan. So about 2 weeks ago, less than 2 weeks ago, Canada came out and said, we're going to put $100 million into an LGBTQ action plan, a 5-year initiative to fight discrimination and support diversity. And baby Trudeau, he's all over this one. So I'm going to play a clip of the news conference on August 28th when they rolled this out. Why? Because I like to torture you. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So here is, first there'll be some person involved with the Canadian government, and then baby Trudeau will speak. But when they talk about this, an acronym, it used to be LGB. Then it became LGBT. Then it was LGBTQ. Well, it's not that anymore, and you'll see that the lady tries to repeat it a couple times. It's kind of humorous what happens, but this is about 2 minutes long.
It's a great privilege for me to be here today as we mark an important milestone in our government's commitment to improving equality for the 2S LGBTQI+ communities. Over the past years, the Government of Canada has consulted and worked alongside many diverse communities to better understand the daily realities and experiences of 2S LGBTQI+ people in Canada. Today's announcement aims to create a more equitable Canada.
Can I tell you how great it's been to see Pride events coming back in person again this year? Just being crowded into this room right now and celebrating is a great, great feeling. Since day one, our government has been committed to protecting the rights of two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, and additional sexuality and gender diverse people. That's why I'm so excited today to announce a historic first, the launch of Canada's first ever 2S LGBTQI+ action plan. This is a whole of government plan that will guide our ongoing work to fight discrimination, to break down barriers, to advance rights, and to build a future where everyone in Canada is truly free to be who they are and love whom they love. On a travaillé avec des leaders, des chercheurs et des organismes communautaires pour que...
Okay, so here's sort of, this is a little video that the government of Canada made up, and you got all the multiple colors, but they do discriminate. They banned what they call conversion therapy is now criminalized in Canada, and they celebrate it. This is fantastic. We're diverse unless you have traditional Judeo-Christian values. Too bad. So, and he must have been practicing this, 2S LGBTQIA+ thing. I mean, I bet he's been talking in the mirror when he's on the days that he does shave. He doesn't always appear to shave. And they're doing these things because this is him a couple of years ago when it was before they added in some of the letters. This is what he was doing.
I will never apologize for standing up for an LGBTQ2+ kids' rights.
Okay, well, thank you. And, so now they've added 2S, two-spirit, and they're pushing this into the schools. So this is a big deal. And a lot of this is this, again, from the World Economic Forum, the future of computing. It's a big deal. And there's a intersection of certain things that are happening. Now, one of the big issues in the world today is water. Countries that have water, I heard a commentator say recently, countries that have water don't usually attack countries that don't have it. And one of the issues with water is that it's kind of expensive to move around. And it's hard. I mean, go pick up a 32-pack of bottles of water at Sam's Club or Costco, and, it can throw your back out. It's pretty heavy stuff. And so, and water sticks to things. It kind of, it makes things rust, and it wears things out, and it erodes ground. We see these flash floods. I mean, they had these horrible floods in Pakistan recently where 1/3 of Pakistan was underwater. In California, which had the fires the other day, they were looking at the risk of flooding because a big storm was coming up from Mexico. And now that the vegetation is burned, they will have flash flooding. And we saw what happened in eastern Kentucky, southeastern Kentucky, there near where it borders Virginia, when they had flash flooding a few weeks ago. I mean, dozens of people died and that sort of thing. And the water, the United States is unique in that we have these incredible river systems that are navigable, that come from our breadbasket, so we can get our industrial goods and crops and everything to market in the cheapest way that it can, because we have the water that flows. And you can, we have to put some locks in here and there, but by and large, we have these incredible waterways. And there's no other country on the planet that has anything like this. That's why some people say this is why America was going to be a great country, even if there were stupid people running it, because of the water resources we have in our heartland. And it's probably true. And so part of this is kind of local news. The president, or his double, I don't know. I don't want to get into those theories, but somebody that was Joe Biden or pretending to be Joe Biden came to Columbus, New Albany, Ohio the other day and broke ground for this big Intel project. And you know that if you drive out there, I've talked about it because they kind of creep me out. And I'll tell you why in just a minute. Facebook server farms north of 161 at that same exit are Amazon server farms. You go to Northwest up around Dublin, Plain City. There's Amazon server farms all over the place. Google's spending $2 or $3 billion out across the street from Facebook. The Facebook buildings, there's 6. A couple of them are still under construction. They're refurbishing the first 2 that only opened a few years ago because their stuff is out of date. And these things are 1,200 feet long. They're almost a quarter of a mile long, roughly 6 stories high, I would guess. Each side, there are 2 sides to the building, each have 1 million square feet. That's 12 million square feet of space out there just for servers. That store little tiny bits and bytes of information. And it takes all those servers interconnected. And that's, as one friend described it to me, he says, that sounds like the mind of the beast. Well, part of the reason they're building it here in Ohio, and the first phase is $20 billion construction, and there's plans to build 5 times that amount, $100 billion over the next number of years. And I always say that, assuming that nothing changes, of course. But that's the plan. And part of it is because we have water here in Ohio. It's dry some years, but by and large, we have water. And 20% of the surface fresh water in the world is part of it. It's just a couple hours north of here. And this is where we get into this the subject of augmented reality. And so you're seeing a lot of articles from World Economic Forum about virtual and augmented reality. Meta, what used to be known as Facebook, is building it. One of their buildings out there is going to be committed to artificial intelligence. And they have server farms like this. I know they have some in Texas. I think they have them in Georgia as well. But that's a lot of places to store all that. They gather all that information. You post a picture about, I went to so-and-so. I saw a friend of mine today. She posted a picture of the World Trade Center in New York as it's the 21st anniversary of 9/11. And Pam and I were there. We went up. We had Sunday brunch at Windows on the World, and we went up to Observation Tower, and it's gone. 21 years ago, it just went away. And it took a long, long time for them to put anything back there to replace it. And even then, it doesn't really replace it, I don't think. So this is what they're talking about. But look at this article from the World Economic Forum, which was put up on August 16th, 2022. Augmented tech can change the way we live, but only with the right support and vision. Now, it's interesting because people are now paying attention to what the World Economic Forum means, because they have got their leadership trained people in government positions. They brag about it. They have these big conferences. And so now what you're finding is on articles that could maybe paint them in a negative light, they're putting up these disclaimers. Help us prevent the spread of disinformation. This article has been intentionally misrepresented on sites that spread false information. Please read the piece for yourself before sharing or commenting. The World Economic Forum is committed to publishing a wide array of opinions. Misrepresenting content diminishes open conversations. Well, here's what I think. Putting up a disclaimer like that diminishes open conversations. You don't want people talking about what you really believe or what you say at your conferences. And then they have this in the article. Superheroes have been dominating big and small screens for a while, but there's a subtle change happening. Many children expect to develop superpowers themselves. Now, listen, every kid fantasizes and dreams. I used to dream about hitting a home run that was important someplace because we played baseball in the backyard. Second base in Middle Branch, Ohio, and the Haller yard was the corner of the septic tank. You didn't really slide into second. And home plate was we had one of those concrete cinder blocks, and you didn't slide into home either. And the corner of the garage across the alley of the neighbors was the foul pole for left field. But we all dreamed this, but there's been a concerted effort by Hollywood and the media to get people to buy into this transhuman agenda. Go watch any of the Avengers series in Marvel. This is exactly what they do. I remember they were filming one up in Cleveland. It was, a couple of the Captain America movies were filmed in Cleveland by the courthouse. I remember I had to stay in the courthouse for about an hour and a half once because they were filming a scene on the street. So Pam and I were in California, and we went to see one. Winter Soldier, Captain America Winter Soldier. And I came out of there, and I was kind of struck by, wait a minute. I was reading back in those days, this is probably almost 10 years ago now, about transhumanism, and I thought, when I watched that movie, I walked out, and I'm pretty sure I said to Pam, I don't think the people here at Ontario Mills Mall really understand what's coming. And here we are about 10 years later, and it's everywhere. So these expectations, this article says, may sound unattainable, but we're already making the first strides toward an augmented society. Trade fairs are boasting augmented reality goggles to show technicians where a particular screw should go. Your own phone gives you information about your fitness in real time or tells you about the latest fad. The limits on implants are going to be set by ethical arguments rather than scientific capacity. For example, should you implant a tracking chip in your child? There are solid rational reasons for it, like safety. Would you actually do it? Is it a bridge too far? Another important element is security. Remember when former American Vice President Dick Cheney, and I don't remember what it was, he had something with his heart. And so there's this control on information. This is an article from California, New York Times, a week or so ago. They've put out a bill to punish doctors who spread false information. Now they say, well, we really can't do anything about them online. Well, unless the White House goes along with it and gets big tech to do it. And there's sort of this quid pro quo that goes on. You know, the government can say, well, listen, you know, we really think you guys got you're pretty big. You're way bigger than almost any companies in history. It sort of looks like antitrust violations. But, you know, if you censor information that we don't like, we'll sort of look the other way on the antitrust stuff. Got it? Wink, wink. And there you go. And now the documents are coming out to show that that's exactly the case. I saw this graphic, sort of the the tsunami of electronic stuff that's coming our way. There's a good article last week in the Wall Street Journal about China's surveillance. This is a picture they used of security cameras that they got from a place in China. And some of those, by the way, have the power. Some of these cameras now have the power. They call them puke cameras because they can put out beams that make you sick. By the way, the United States has more cameras than China. London has a lot of cameras. Jerusalem, if you go to Jerusalem, there's cameras all over the place. And in the old city, there's a big place where they kind of monitor everything. And they do it for security. You understand why. But we were staying in an apartment building. I made a wrong turn in the parking garage. You know, I thought I would exit this way, and I was going down further into the garage. So I turned around and came back up, and there was a security guard from the building we were staying. He goes, "Are you going, did you go the wrong direction, Mr. Haller?" Because he was watching on the security camera at his desk at the entrance. And so the example that I used a couple months ago was this great graphic that I found. I forget where I found it, about the Panopticon. The Panopticon was Jeremy Bentham was a criminologist who put together this thing about this prison where the guards are in that center pillar place and they can see into every cell. But the prisoners can't see where they're looking. So it's a way for them to get 24/7 surveillance without actually having to provide 24/7 surveillance. And there at Stateville Prison in Joliet, Illinois was built on this pattern, and a lot of other places. And somebody said, you know, this is like what Facebook is. This is what like these tech companies are. So we don't know. And I could go on and on about this because this is a big issue of the world that we live in. So just a few other things I want to talk about. You know, I always come up here sometimes, I think, I don't have anything to talk about, and then I do. But here, this is an interesting story. I will be honest with you. Pope Francis instructs Vatican entities to move all funds to the Vatican Bank by September 30. Now, there's, in the Bible prophecy community, a lot of people are like, this is really significant, this is really big. I don't know. I'll be honest with you, I don't know. The Vatican Bank is not that big. It's only has about $5 or $6 billion in assets. And you think, well, that's pretty big to me. But understand, J.P. Morgan, which has its headquarters, 10 miles or so down the road from here, its operational headquarters, they're close to $4 trillion. So they're quite a bit bigger. And Wells Fargo and some others, they're in the mid to high 3 trillion asset values. So I don't know what to make of this. We'll have to see. Now, that's Doesn't mean the Vatican doesn't have more than $5 or $6 billion. They have way more than that, but this is the bank assets that I'm talking about. So this happened this week. Queen Elizabeth passed away. She had been the only queen of the UK, the British Empire that I ever knew in my lifetime. Over 70 years, the second longest reigning monarch since the birth of Christ. I think it was Louis XIV of France who ascended to the throne much younger than Queen Elizabeth did. She was 26, I believe, when she assumed the throne. Louis XIV was like 8 or something like that, and he reigned for right around 72 years. So it looked for a while that Queen Elizabeth was going to get there, but her husband, whether you like him or not, she probably loved him, and he died last year, and this is very common. He was 99. They'd been married for 72 or 73 years, and that's hard. Even Israel Hayom, Israel Today, covered it. I mean, everywhere you look, there's just all these commemorative issues with pictures of her. And she'd been around a long time, 14 presidents. Tuesday, she had a meeting at Balmoral Castle in Scotland, one of her favorite places, and she met Liz Truss, who's the new Prime Minister of the UK. She gave her the authority to form a government. So Liz Truss would have been the 15th Prime Minister that she worked, the first being a guy named Winston Churchill. Her reign spanned about 30% of the entire period of time that the United States has been a country. That kind of puts it into perspective. So this is her at Balmoral on Tuesday. If you notice, her right hand is bruised pretty badly. Now everybody's talking about how did she die? Did somebody take her out? And all this. She's 96, so who knows? And she was getting old and frail. And I don't know if we'll ever know, but you can see her hand, it's discolored there. Some think she fell or had some reaction to a medication or a treatment or something. So who knows? So the oldest monarch to assume the throne now is King Charles III, who is I think a committed globalist. He is at least the named head of the Church of England. There was an article that Daniel Pipes wrote, 25 years ago, which questioned, based on what Prince Charles was saying about Islam, is he a convert to Islam? And we don't know. And he'll have to back off, I think, on some of his. Traditionally, he would have to back off on his political views as the monarch, but who knows that what she did. And the Financial Times also has this article about the changes that happened during the reign of Queen Elizabeth II. The decline in the family, marriage, fertility rates. It's a very interesting thing that's happened. And so the funeral is going to be a week from tomorrow in London. Millions will line the streets. So you have these all these things about her. Let's see. Well, I'll mention this because we were talking about the elite. So she'd been queen for a long time. And the reaction has been, she's a wonderful Christian woman, to she's a reptilian killer. And that's actually the view of some people. There's some suggestion from people that she'd met with Billy Graham and that she might actually have accepted the Lord as her Savior. So someday we'll know. Right now, I don't think we get to make the call on anybody's salvation. If we see somebody acting badly, we have to agree that, well, they need to get saved somehow, or clean up their life for sure. So this is the elites, and I talked about this, and I'll skip over this, but I talked about this a little bit. I played clips of that interview where Yuval Harari had said, we just don't need the vast majority of the population. And in this article, it says the elites view themselves as gods, bestowing and extinguishing life at will. And this is the view of these people and this is very, very concerning. This was an editorial cartoon from the Times of London. So let me talk about a couple things that are going on that I think are sometimes overlooked. It's just something that interests me, so that's why I talk about it. And that's why I can say, well, they overlook that. I don't understand why. Well, it interests me. And one of these is demographics. I've mentioned that in the Tehran Times and other publications coming out of Iran that and these are approved by Iranian government, they have said that the fertility rate has collapsed more quickly in Iran than more quickly than any country in human history. Now, what does that mean? Well, it might mean if we just wait them out, they're toast. If we're replacing our people. But the other one is China. Now, Niles Ferguson, good writer, this is actually in the Washington Post back in mid-August. China demographics spelled decline, not domination. And the theory is among people who look at this is that demographics is destiny. But it's also indicative of what a country might do on its way down. So China's demographics are collapsing. The United States is collapsing. We would not be in the position we are if we did not have immigration. And there's a trade-off there. You bring in the people that share your values and that sort of thing. That's always the issue. But I think that we would be in a population decline. And when you go into a population decline, your economy changes and your ability to serve the economy. Japan's been going through this for 30 years. We're on the verge of going through it. Europe, Italy, Spain, other countries in Europe, they're past the tipping point. They're past the point where they can change and turn it around. So Niles Ferguson talked about this, and there's a podcast put out by the Hoover Institution associated with Stanford University. It's called the Goodfellas Report. They talked about this either this week or last week. And they said, in China, the population decline is so dramatic and so fast that they're going around, and they have, in the video clip, they have them blowing up whole blocks of apartment buildings. I'm talking like 50, 60-story buildings. Why? They don't need them. They're running out of people. Now, this affects supply chains. You see how there's this synergistic thing. The question then is, are they going to do anything because they're in demographic decline? And the answer is they might, because they're in demographic decline. So the United States, this was at the Aspen Economic Forum. This was one of the papers presented, Causes and Consequences of Declining U.S. Fertility. And serious thinkers are seriously concerned about it because it plays into what I titled this update, The Age of Uncertainty. What is going to happen when all of this happens? Look at this chart. This is they put it up at Bloomberg, but it was also up at the Washington Post. China's population headed down, but how far? So they have three scenarios: a low fertility, medium fertility, and a high fertility. The high fertility is if they can turn it around. So for the last 10 years, they've been trying to turn around their one-child policy. It hasn't worked at all. It has had no change. And part of that is the world we live in. Younger people, they just see this dystopian world, and they're just not inclined to have children. It's just the way it is. I don't like it. So the high fertility one, that's fantasy land. That's never going to happen. So they project out to 21. So they're close to 1.5 billion now. But on a low fertility thing, by 2100, they're down to 500 million. That's 1/3 the population that they have now in China. What's the societal impact of that? How long can they sustain it? Russia's going through the same thing. Now the United States is on track, absent immigration. But the other thing is, if you really look at the numbers, China, under a low fertility scenario, could be half its population by 2050. Now, when I say that, everybody says, oh, so you think we're going to be around here until 2050? I don't know how long we're going to be around here. I'm pretty sure that statistically, me making it to 2050 is, kind of marginal. I mean, I had a mother that lived till 90, almost 91, so maybe, but I had a father who died in his late 60s, so who knows which way I'm going to go. It's really up in the air. But maybe, so what happens when a country sees that and the Chinese leaders know this. So what happens when a country sees itself declining like this? The leaders say, well, if we're going to have a legacy and build this great middle kingdom that China wants that they talk about, maybe now we have to do what we're going to do now. And so that brings in Taiwan and attacks on the U.S. and potential war, invasions elsewhere. A lot of that plays right into Bible prophecy. So the war in Ukraine had some changes this week. And this is kind of interesting to watch because there's the pro-Russian side and there's the pro-Ukrainian side. And they think the other sides are total idiots and dupes that they can't think through a problem. My view is that, in the law sometimes, you would have a contested case, and it could go either way. So sometimes we would say things like, there are two sides to every story, and sometimes they're both right. And I'll think about that a little bit because it's true that a case could go either way. So Ukraine has started an offensive. They've took back some territory. Russia's withdrawn. So the pro-Russian people say, oh, we've got them right where we want them. They've taken this territory and we're going to do a pincer move and we're going to wipe them out. That could be what happens. And Ukraine, I saw a picture of, they had a map in a big public area. I don't know if it was in Ukraine or not, but they put up the map that showed that Ukraine had taken back territory, and the people were running around, jumping up and down, yelling and screaming, how happy about it. So this is so they've taken this area back. This is one, and then you see people putting up articles like this. Putin scrambles for high-tech parts as his arsenal goes up in smoke. And there's probably some truth to this. People are saying he's running out of artillery. He's using old shells. Well, maybe he's using old shells because he can get away with it. So you got to look at it both ways, and we'll see how this plays out. But also understand, though, that an important part of this is the red line there. There's a river. So you see the Crimean Peninsula there in the Black Sea. That's historically a very dry area. After Russia took over that area, the vegetation started to change. That was almost exclusively due to an irrigation canal that came from near Kherson along the river that was open because Russia took back the Crimean Peninsula and I think Ukraine allowed it to happen. And so now this year in the Crimean Peninsula, they had their best crops ever because they had water. And it's not like you can ship water into there. You're going to have it run downhill through a canal. Well, now Ukraine's maybe taking back that area where they can close that gate. I think that's one of their goals. And then Crimea goes into an agricultural problem. So that's part of what's going on there. Now, the question is, how does that play into Bible prophecy? Honestly, I don't know. It's just wars and rumors of wars. A lot of people think, and I kind of lean this way myself, that the Ezekiel 38, 39 thing, Russia is involved in that. But, Russia's not, they didn't run over Ukraine like everybody thought. And if they had supply chain problems in Ukraine, if they're going to go into Israel, you add 1,000 miles to their supply chain issues. So that's why I talk about logistics. And if they're committed to it, they'll get it done. But my view is it just doesn't happen overnight. So the big deal right now in Europe is energy prices, cost. Plants are shutting down in Germany because they can't afford the energy. They went to renewables. Putin has essentially cut off the supplies of gas. The other problem is that the utility companies use derivatives to sort of hedge their bets on the price of energy and that sort of thing. And these things are going the wrong way. And so there's, by some estimates, the European power producers could face margin calls of 1.5 trillion euros. They won't be able to meet those margin calls. So the governments are stepping in. Liz Truss says, well, we're going to freeze utility bills for 2 years. The Europeans came in and said, well, we've got a solution. We're going to cap the price that utility companies can charge. And Putin says, I don't care. I'm shutting off Nord Stream. You're not getting anything now. In fact, there was a video that they put out. Just look at this. There's not much. Just keep the sound low on it. This is a video that the Russian gas company put out to Germany. It's a message. Look, Germany, it's going to be cold this winter. It's going to be icy. It's going to be cold. The rivers are freezing. And this is to you, Europe. This is directly to you from Gazprom. Good luck. Nord Stream, we're shutting it down. So it's kind of a bit of a war. Now, the European elite, largely populated with World Economic Forum people. This is Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU. She gave a speech this week. Listen to what she says and listen to the words that she used about how do we solve this problem. Here she goes.
What has changed over the summer because of the elements I was just mentioning, that we see there's a global scarcity of energy. So whatever we do, one thing is for sure, we have to save electricity, but we have to save it in a smart way. If you look at the costs of electricity, there are peak demands. And this is what is expensive, because in these peak demands, the expensive gas comes into the market. So what we have to do is flatten the curve and avoid the peak demands. We will propose a mandatory peak demands. The expensive gas comes into the market. So what we have to do is flatten the curve and avoid the peak demands. We will propose a mandatory target for reducing electricity use.
And this is this is the language that they use. Did we hear the term flatten the curve at all in the last 2.5 years? It was 2 weeks to flatten the curve. Now it's going to be how many weeks to flatten the curve on energy prices? And how are they going to solve it? Lockdowns, or they could do like what they did in Colorado. I mentioned this last week. At least 22,000 customers in Denver. They had a demand on the grid because of hot weather. And they lost the ability. It said you can't adjust your thermostat till 8 a.m. tomorrow. And we're going to set it at what we think is the appropriate temperature. Those are smart meters. And you can say, don't take a smart meter, don't take a smart meter. Well, listen, like around here, you didn't have a choice. Like if you want energy from us, you'd get a smart meter. And now they have control. And now they're going to flatten the curve again. And then they also, the bigger picture here is sustainable practices and business as usual. I tried to find a graphic. I didn't have time to make it with, you got the curve and the graph, and you got this giant hammer. They're going to come in and pound it flat. And this is the way it's going to go. So, this is kind of an interesting article in connection with all of this. Can Japan feed itself? Supply chains. Now, look, around the U.S. right now, you've not seen much in the way of food shortages. I would not take comfort in that because we got food left over from last year. But crops are down. Corn production, if you read Michael Snyder's Economic Collapse blog, you might want to do it with, I don't know what because we don't advocate drinking around here, but, and I don't know if coffee would help either. So I would recommend that you read it because he has some good insight into all these things and he pulls a lot of resources together. But here's Japan is like, are they going to be able to feed themselves? Because they import like 70% of their food. Arab countries import 90%, some of them in the Middle East import 90% of their food. Why is that? They live in a desert. And guess what? Unless you bring water in, stuff doesn't grow in the desert. And everybody says, well, just do desalination plants. Well, that requires a lot of energy and power. Israel does it. And some of the Arab countries could with their oil, but it's a technical thing. And it's hard to do it. It's not easy. It's not that easy. And everybody says, well, why don't they just liquefy natural gas and ship it around? Well, that costs money. Got to get the ships, you got to get the ports, you got to get the port facilities, you got to get the regasification facilities. You don't build those overnight. You can build them, but it costs 3, 4, 5 times to transport gas that way than if you do it by pipeline. That's the cheapest way. People say, well, Israel could help. Yeah, but they don't have a pipeline. They don't have gasification facilities, LNG facilities. And it would take probably 5 years to build a pipeline through water that is almost 10,000 feet deep. It's a very technically challenging thing. It can be done. It's been done, but it doesn't happen overnight. And so, again, it's part of this convergence when you've got the demographic problem and the energy problem and this and that. It's very interesting, and I think this plays into Bible prophecy. So, winter gas shortages in Europe likely to last 3 to 5 years. You got Iran making nuclear weapons. They're trying to do this Iran nuclear. I'll talk more about this in a midweek update. This is kind of interesting. We have the issue with Lebanon. Lebanon continues to make threats against Israel. As I was researching this, I was reminded of something. I haven't really mentioned it. The largest U.S. embassy in the world is the embassy in Baghdad. It took a while to build. Do you know that the U.S., in a country where the population, if they didn't have immigrants, they would have about 4.5 million people in Lebanon. We're building the second largest U.S. embassy in the world in Lebanon. I don't know why. You're going to ask why. I don't know why. It's costing over like $1.2 billion. How many of you knew this? I knew they were building one there. I just didn't know the cost. But so here's some of the pictures of it. Under construction. It's supposed to open next year. This is some of the architectural drawings of what it's supposed to look like. I don't even know what kind of message they're trying to send with this. And we have these other building projects. Here's a new building project in Dubai. This is up the coast from Abu Dhabi, where they're building that Abrahamic family house that's supposed to open next month with a big symphony, the Unity of Three. But this is the Burj Al Dubai, the tallest building on the planet. It's like a half a mile high. And look up a quarter mile in the air, they want to build this big ring around it. And they've got money to do this. And this is what they've planned. Alma Research has a great article about Hezbollah is on high alert toward a possible confrontation with Israel. They talk about the weapons and missiles that they have, the drones that they have, 65,000. That's a lot of drones. And they can overwhelm the system. And there's still, this is the graphic I've made up about the gas fields off the coast of Israel and the demarcation problem, the borderline that they're trying to make up. And this is Hezbollah. This is Alma Research. If you just look for Alma Research on the internet, you can get to this article, ALMA. And it sort of summarizes what Nasrallah said over the past 3 months, about this gas field is a big deal to Hezbollah. And Israel's, to give you an example of what they do, so Energean, which is the company that's sort of doing the drilling with their facilities there, here's a picture of their boat that they use. It's called an FPSO. It's a pretty amazing ship as to what they can do. I mean, look at this is sort of a graphic of, see how the lines and everything come down and they go out, they branch out in all these ways to get the gas. And then it's transported, then it's piped over to the coast there by Haifa. I'm fascinated. I mean, the stuff that, I turn on the stove. We have a gas range, and I have gas and it lights most of the time. And you don't think about all the logistical things that had to go in place to get that energy to you. So what happened was they put out this report, and they said we're on track for Karish Field to start delivering gas within weeks. Now, it was supposed to happen September 1st. So what did Hezbollah do with this? And the Hezbollah Al-Akbar newspaper, they took it and they said, oh, look, they were worried about us and they've delayed things because they're so afraid of us. Okay, whatever. Amos Hochstein, I won't play it.
But as usual, a good one. Good discussions with the leaders. And you know that I always say I'm an optimist. But I really feel that we're making progress these last several weeks, and I hope to make additional progress and materialize this for an agreement that at the end of the day will give hope and economic activity in Lebanon, bring stability to the region, and I think this will be good for all involved.
The problem is, Israel's negotiating with a terrorist government about this. We're negotiating with a terrorist government in Tehran about the Iranian nuclear deal. Now, Lapid came out and said this morning, the acting prime minister of Israel, and said, I don't think Iran's going to sign on. Well, if Iran doesn't sign on, what are they going to do? What's going to happen? So I hope to interview this week or next. I'm trying to set up an interview with Brigadier General Amir Avivi, who heads up, he's the founder of the Israeli Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. So pray that comes together. It's kind of hard to balance when they're 7 hours time difference, but I think it'll happen. And I'm going to ask him some of the things about what do you view from the security situation in Israel? Because there's unrest in the Arab areas. Tom Nidis, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, came out and was either interviewed or did a talk just yesterday, and he said, hey, we're all for a two-state solution. Well, what does that mean? That's just like, I think Caroline Glick on her podcast this week said, that's insanity. We're dealing with terrorists. Why are we trying to reach these agreements with it? And why is the Biden administration, or the Biden administration, trying to force this? What's going on? It doesn't make any sense. And the answer is it doesn't make any sense. And I'll finish with this. And again, I'll do an update midweek to talk a little bit more detail about some of this stuff. But for example, here's the head of Hamas. he lives in Qatar, and sometimes he goes to Lebanon. I don't think he ever goes to Gaza, where Hamas runs everything. And I always am fascinated by him, because we always think of and I'll use the term Palestinians, as relatively poor, very poor in Gaza. This guy's got this groomed beard. I mean, he must go to a barber every day. You have to do that to keep it looking like that. So he apparently can afford to do that. But he's in Moscow right now meeting with Putin and Lavrov. Now, do you think Russia's friendly to Israel? You may think that, but I'm not so sure because they're playing off people against everybody all the time. And then this week, there's going to be this meeting in Uzbekistan for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Here is a video that a Turkish television, TRT World, put up just this morning. I want you to look at this and look at who's involved in this, and then look at what we talk about in Bible prophecy, because this is interesting. Here is the Shanghai Cooperative Organization sort of promo meeting. They'll be meeting the 15th.
Rapidly expanding and increasingly more in demand, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is holding its annual summit, this time in Samarkand in Uzbekistan. There's also a special guest, NATO member and current dialogue partner, Turkey. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization covers 40% of the Earth's population and almost a third of the world's GDP. Global issues are the SCO's issues. What measures will be taken to battle? Food insecurity, economic crises, deepening humanitarian needs, and climate change. The SCO's influence is growing. But how far and how fast? Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit 2022. Special coverage on TRT World.
And so did you see, this is from the one that they had in 2018, and there's two parties that are being added this time that have either had observation status or we kind of let you come and watch what's going on. But this was an announcement today. The 2022 summit will mark Iran's accession to the group. That's the Stan republics, China, Russia, now Iran. And did you see in the video, our special guest EU member, Turkey, and President Erdogan. I think that's kind of a big deal. Now, how does this mean some of these things we talk about are happening next week? I don't think so, but I'm just saying it's part of things moving into place, and it bears watching. And it's, if I would have been smart as a young guy, I would have got the conference, the guy who set up all these conferences. Because I'd have a penthouse at the Burj Al Dubai in Dubai, I guess, at this point. There's conferences all over the place, but you need to watch what they're going on because they go there and they talk, and everything is live streamed now, and everything is put up on the internet, and it's there for you to see. So when Ursula von der Leyen comes out, and now all of a sudden, what was for Charlie Vector, now it relates to climate change, and now it relates to our current energy crisis, flatten the curve. What are they going to do with that? What did they do with it when they talked about flattening the curve the last time? Europe is in major crisis. I don't think it'll stay in Europe. This could be a very interesting year. So look, we shouldn't be fearful. We know these things are going to happen. I want to play this, because I think you need to keep this in perspective, because you saw Biden's speech, and people in the church in the world saw Biden's speech. I can't even talk about some of the emails and communications I've had, because the locations would put people's lives at risk. But you need to pray for fellow believers elsewhere. And sometimes we need to pay attention to what they might say to us. Now, this comes from Joel Richardson's YouTube channel. And again, don't interpret this to mean that I don't know everything that Joel Richardson thinks on things. He doesn't know what I think. I'm pretty sure he's a brother. I know he's a brother in Christ. Like some of the stuff he does. Maybe I don't like some of the stuff he does. It's irrelevant. The message here is important. And you need to listen. This comes from the persecuted church in Iran to the church in the West. It's only 2 minutes long, and we'll finish with this.
سلام خواهر و برادرای عزیزم که توی غرب هستید. ما چند وقت پیش سخنرانی رئیس جمهور بایدن رو به کشور آمریکا شنیدیم و دیدیم که خیلی محکم و با عصبانیت مشتش رو گره کرد و گفت که بزرگترین دشمنش توی سیاستش دموکراسی و قانون کشور و آزادی و این چیزها هستن که تهدید میکنن و ما 2 سال پیش شنیدیم از خدا که جفا وارد کلیسای غرب میشه و همونطوری که شما از رئیس جمهورتون شنیدین ما هم از دولتمون شنیدیم که گفتن که کلیساهای زیرزمینی بزرگترین تهدید هستن و دشمنشون هستن. اما واقعیت اینه که ما همه یک خانواده هستیم و از قانون کشورمون حمایت میکنیم و اون رو رعایت میکنیم. مسیح خیلی شفاف و روشن به ما گفت که روزایی میاد که دنیا از ما نفرت پیدا میکنه و ما رو میکشن و وقتی این کار رو میکنن خودشون فکر میکنن که دارن خدمت میکنن به خدا. ما با این تهدید هر روز زندگی میکنیم از طرف روح وحشی اسلام. این روح اسلام توی آمریکا نیست ولی همین روح شرعی توی کشورتون هست. اون روزی میاد که دولت خودتون میگه که شهروندای معمولی برای ما تهدید هستن. دوست عزیزم به ما گوش کن. آخرین فصل امتحان به زودی داره میاد. الان وقتشه که کلیسای غرب توی قلبش حل کنه این موضوع و محکم وایسه برای مسیح، برای کسایی که گوش دارن و میشنون و کسایی که چشم دارن و میبینن. و دعای ما برای اونجا فیض خدا و فیض مسیح برای همه شما عزیزان.
So go read 1st and 2nd Peter. There's words in there for us. I think it was Joel tweeted this morning or yesterday. It's the 21st anniversary of 9/11. I'm watching, he said, and I would agree with him, I'm watching what's going on in the world. I do not think that we have another 21 years before the Lord returns. That fact ought to motivate you to get it together and to share the gospel with people. Jesus is the only hope for this world. We should know that. It should be abundantly clear to that now. I've said this a number of times, that I think that part of what's going on now is to decouple the church from the world. And doesn't mean you give up, okay? But it means you've got to intensify what you're doing for the Lord and act in a godly fashion. So interesting times, is it not? So let's pray. Lord, we just pray that you'll help us to take to heart the message of these brothers and sisters in Christ from Iran who have reached out to warn us of what they think is, from their observation and experiences, coming to us. And pray that you will give us the full power of the Holy Spirit so we can stand in an evil time. And to remember that everything we do, and however it works out for us, we are always to act with the attitude that we want whatever happens to us, whatever we do, to glorify you. Help us always to keep that in mind. We thank you so much for the gift of your Son. We pray that you'll bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.